Hello, and welcome to Label Sessions Presents. Label Sessions is a global platform that connects you to the best advice from the most interesting people, whether you want advice, mentoring, or ideas. I'm Josh Nixon, content producer for Label Sessions. In this episode, Iain Montgomery of Label Sessions talks to Predrag Radenovic, not only a frequent of the Sessions Superclubs in Toronto, but a global marketing leader. He made his name in his native Serbia with Philip Morris International and Carlsberg before coming to Canada to pioneer brands like Heineken with the Molson Coors Beverage Company. Now, he is a managing partner of Motivation Branding to explore the motivations behind why brands succeed. Predrag recaps his talk he made at the Supper Club with Iain for those who couldn't make it.
Tell us a little bit about you and your background, and then that little journey from Serbia to Canada via Copenhagen.
I worked in brand marketing for most of my career. I started in Serbia, where I was born and raised, and I worked for big blue chip companies in the FMCG, as we called it in Europe, or CPG, as we call it here in Canada. And I was always curious to learn how to grow the brand, because the brand for me was and still is very conceptual, very theoretical part of the business, and applying that and actually using it for the brand, for the business growth was a big mystery for me. I think it's less today than it was, but yeah, I think it still has a lot to uncover, especially if you apply that concept now to a different businesses. Anyhow, I progressed my career through CPGs in the region, and I was always hungry for knowledge. So when the opportunity popped up to join the global team on Tuborg in Copenhagen, I went there gladly and worked there for a year. And over the course of next following years, I joined Molson and led their premium agenda in Europe, and eventually landed in Canada a couple of years ago when was heading Heineken brand here in Toronto, in Canada. So that was my brief journey. Throughout that journey, I was always having an entrepreneurial worm, as I say, within me, who was bugging me to do something on my own. And year and a half ago, I started my own small shop here in Toronto. So now I'm consulting on brand and marketing.
So in the Supper Club, you talked about we talked about brand, and you shared a bit of framework. So like the things that you've done with motivation branding and like how that kind of works. We'll do this without slides, so this is all in somebody's ears. But maybe just share a bit about that motivation brand framework, and then how you use it a little bit.
So our slogan is motivation is behavior is irrelevant, motivation is everything. So behavior is irrelevant, motivation is everything, meaning not what consumer does, it's why they do it that matters. That's essentially how you shift the behavior. So the framework that we have essentially starts with the market segmentation based on the large data, which either comes from us or from a customer, and it applies and looks at the consumers through a lenses of modern and traditional approach to life, intrinsic and extrinsic on the other curve, and then different values around the circle. And if you look at the market in that way, you can figure out that different segments have different motivations, and then as you can plot the consumers on that segmentation map, you can plot the brands. And then it's an interesting framework because it allows you to play on both ends, on the consumer and on the brand side, and then carve the path forward and essentially set the strategy that will untap the growth.
In terms of the types of places where you use that, talk through a few examples, because you used one in the supper club that was really awesome.
So yeah, that was the project that the team was doing before I joined, but I'm very familiar with the example because I was responsible for the market on the other side when it was applied. It's in the beer market in Russia, and at the time, market was traditionally tied to spirits, namely vodka, and even though beer as a category existed before, they were the big companies entered several years before and started building the market in traditional way with all the traditional marketing campaigns tying beer brands to music, masculinity, and everything. And then working for the Anadolu Efes at the time, the team was looking at the market and it came to two interesting insights. One is that vodka essentially is very, very traditional and mainstream drink, and that females essentially show appeal for the beer as well to a higher percentage than they usually do in other markets. So working through the framework, the company eventually launched a champagne-like female beer brand that created an instant success and grew immediately to a few percentage of the market share, which then they continue to build. So I guess cross-referencing the traditional category insights with particular market knowledge through the segmentation and the model that we have eventually help that happen.
In terms of like the cultural difference of like you come from Serbia to Canada. I joke about Serbia and Russia being similar, but they're really not. But like doing that in a market like Russia is quite different to doing that in a market like the US. But in the US, the champagne of beers would be Miller High Life, which is still quite a masculine brand, but it's quite universal. It's sort of funny how that similar insight then gets applied in Russia in quite a different way around a different sort of segment and a different sort of group.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's interesting to build, you'd say, a traditional category across different markets, and especially from the big beer cultures, such are some of the Western European markets or Canada and US. Even they differ. Now, coming back to one of our discussions from a few days ago, the way that beer is served here in Canada, the way that the entire on-premise world works here, and the way the pubs operate versus, for instance, they do in England, also kind of inspires that innovation, right?
So the context of like where a beer is served, why someone's gone to that bar, why someone goes to a bar in Canada is actually quite different to why someone goes to a bar in England or Serbia or whatever it might be, and then that changes how you brand that beer effectively. So I guess you've seen that by doing Heineken in Canada, and then you've seen that brand obviously all around the world. Yes,
I mean, to build, I'm trying to say something smart here. to build on what you said, it's very different to build a local brand versus global brand, and I was always in favor of being local, so applying global strategies in the local context and making it locally relevant. In Heineken, we had that challenge all the time, and they have it. They have it. I think they're doing it quite well, because it does take that point of differentiation to anchor the brand in the local market, and it using the global sponsorship as Heineken does with F1 and some music festival does help. But then effectively you gotta figure out that um, uh, local insight, uh, coming back to differences of why consumers go to pub, and how they behave, and what do they do in pubs here or in Europe, um, is very, very important. I mean, I was leading the brand at the time when the on-trade was dead during the COVID. So we were figuring out more, call it a hardware of the business. How do we develop the deliveries? How do we help our partners and customers in the on-trade keep their business? And there were big discussions about whether the behavior will shift, and whether people will gather more at homes and outside after COVID. Was a big and very vocal about that. People will go back to pubs because we're all social beings, and gathering outside in that urban environment, not necessarily in the barbecue, outside in the nature, is I think deeply rooted, and motivations that sit there lay beyond just the socializing.
This podcast is brought to you by Label Sessions, the global platform that connects you to the best advice from the most interesting people. Around the world, we work with brands to connect their people to true leaders, just like the people you hear on this podcast, for live sessions of advice, mentoring, or sometimes to collaborate on ideas. To find out more, visit labelsessions.com and book in for a demo with our team.
So in terms of like, you've gone from this career shift from doing it at the big brand, and now you often do it for the big brands as well as cool little companies as well. What advice do you find yourself giving most of the time to people around brand, and how they can evolve it, how they can design their brands around people's motivations? When do you keep coming back to it? It's like, that's the piece of advice that you give really, really well.
It's a twofold answer, Iain. If we look at the big corporations and the big companies, and those, by this I mean like not top 5 players in the market, whether they have global or regional business. I want to say, especially for the guys that are working on the brand, getting out of the office and being in touch with the real world is of the utmost importance, because we tend to dive into Excel's data, PowerPoints, and everything, and lose connection with the real world. So my strong suggestion would be spend at least a day with your sales rep on the field, and test your concept with your friends in the pub on your night out. And for the smaller businesses, I would definitely say that it's more hustle. It's way less structure, way less procedures. But once the business reaches a certain level, having a brand strategy is very important, because then it defines how you show up in the world, how you communicate, how essentially you build that brand equity, and what is it that you want to be known for. I want to say that, and I was having these discussions because I'm trying to untap the market for that smaller business. The startups probably don't need the brand strategy at the beginning, because they got to build the legs on the go and run at the same time. But after they reach certain level, keeping the brand in sight and minding brand building is very important.
Yeah, that sort of two-way thing of I remember we talked about this at the Supper Club, and like we use McDonald's as an example of there's quite a consistent set of brand guidelines, but they'll play and experiment at the same time. If I come back to the first time we met, I remember like you sitting down and ordering a Heineken 0.0, and I thought you were a bit weird. But you were like drinking the brand that you were launching. You were asking the bartender about it. You're asking me about it. You were immersing yourself in that and like trying to learn and play. Meanwhile, you have like a smaller business, which is they don't have guidelines, but as they get a bit of scale and they start to figure out what works, they kind of then need to make it a little bit more consistent to really ensure they do scale well. I guess that's where you're kind of getting to.
100%. In order to scale, the brand is a vehicle to scale. 100%. And if we manage to build it, and if we manage to, be consistent across different touch points, but at the same time, to your point, play with it and then test and learn, that's the formula, I'd say, especially for the smaller brands, regardless of the business or the industry.
What's like a piece of advice that you would give your former self if you went back to young Predrag and growing through his career in Belgrade? What advice would you give yourself now, knowing what you know now, sitting in Canada?
I mean, do what you did. I was, in all humbleness. I mean, so Serbia at the time was a freshly open market when I started my career, and the concept of the brand building was not familiar in Serbia, and certainly not as developed in the more progressive markets in West. So I was being so intrigued by the brand itself, I was pushing myself to learn more and more. And I was lucky to work for the big companies that were providing some trainings on different brand frameworks and applying different brand frameworks. So, I mean, eventually I achieved what I wanted to untap and understand the brand deeper than a pyramid or a diamond or whatever the framework is used.
Take your pick of 3, 4, 5-sided shape or linear process.
So yeah, I mean, coming back to that advice, I mean, it's just I was trying to understand the concept and to understand how does it apply to the business. And if I look back, I was doing it throughout my career. So do what you did.
You've been coming to the Supper Clubs in Toronto for a while. You've basically stamped the loyalty card a few times by this point. So I'm really thankful that we turned you from guest to speaker. But why should someone come to a Supper Club? We've got one coming up soon, so we need to give it a plug. Why should someone come along to one of those?
Thank you for the praise. I want to say I'm not the only one who's a huge fan of Supper Clubs. But aside of few people who come relatively regularly, I think it's a great environment, and that you set up a great environment for an open discussion on topics that are important and that we can all learn from and apply them, regardless of the profession we're in. And that's my motive to keep coming back. It's not only the people that you meet, it is a networking event, and you definitely meet great, interesting people. Like the last Supper Club that we had is another great example of that, where I had some fantastic discussions about the application of digital platforms, development of that, which is not my field of expertise, but it's also the topics that you bring are very very interesting, and I mean, I find it a platform to learn.
Awesome. We're doing something right. So thank you.
You definitely are.
And then last thing, something we have to get right, like your Predrag, your Pedja, your PR.
Yeah, I mean, it's I come from a culture of nicknames. My name is one harder to spell in Serbian as well than some other names. Two, in my culture, you're called by your full name only by your mom or your grandma when you did something very wrong. So I always still get, kindly awed when people call me by my full name. I'm getting used to it though. And I mean, being here, it's obviously for the English speaker, it's very hard to pronounce. So PR is my Canadian nickname, which I was awarded a long time ago while I was working with Americans. But I mean, I wear it proudly now and don't sweat it if people cannot pronounce my name. So
we'll just say good luck to people who listen to this and then need to go search up Predrag Radenovic on LinkedIn. So if they can't find you, come find me. I'll help you find him.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing this, mate. Nice to do like a good little recap, even if it was a little while ago now.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So concludes another episode of Label Sessions Presents. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the podcast no matter your platform of choice, and of course, start your journey today with us at labelsessions.com.